I put a couple links in the comment
cool.
section there, Anthony. Justin Bieber is having some issues, and then my favorite New York Times. They had a chatbot counselor.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I do have some thoughts on that.
May have to go assign. I'll be back, guys.
Okay.
So I do think that there's a lot of room for therapist AIs to replace the low and medium level therapist, to be honest. I just don't see it replacing some of the more skilled therapists, and I could explain why. Because what they do is not something that anyone would dare do. Like, like it's not following logical. It's logical, but it's not. Like, I will fight with my clients, for example. I'll argue with them. There's theory behind why you do that.
If you combine that with one of those Tesla robots, you're saying we can't. I mean, Japan's making robots look really nice.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's some really interesting idea behind it. But the idea is like can you get the attachment? Like, if you know you're talking to a robot, you're not really going to get the same attachment benefits as you would from like a real person. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't kind of trick somebody and that they wouldn't benefit from it. Which I haven't read this carefully. I've kind of skimmed it real quick, but I suspect that, you correct me if I'm wrong, but this therapist helped clients feel better. It was AI. They didn't know it was AI. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. Which I think would be easier to succeed. That if they know they're talking to an AI bot, it kind of doesn't work as well all of a sudden. It's unfortunate.
Interesting, throwing it out there. Dr. Marie's not here. I know what her thoughts are going to be on
that.
What would she say?
Yeah. I thought that was interesting that Josh said challenge you. I have heard that sometimes people want to be challenged. I would say we might be a little too quick to do that, some of us in our society. One other thing I was going to say, go on, say
too quick to challenge people?
Yeah, particularly if somebody's in emotional distress, it'll get better, or what did you do, or
It could be a symptom of where I live. I could be wrong about this, but I think therapists are they're too much into validating people's emotions and not enough into like helping them critically work through it or challenging their thought patterns.
That would be. Yeah. No, and I just meant, I didn't mean therapists. I meant as a society. We don't.
Sure.
But I think empathy is dying, but yeah, therapists certainly would be more likely. I was going to say I saw some research that I could pull up if I need, but basically there's a lot of variance among therapists, and they said that like the best therapists are like 10 times better than the average. And I guess they measured that through client response, et cetera. And I don't know if they know what causes that, but that could be. Yeah, maybe AI is good because it's better than the average Joe on the street, AJ, but it's not better than the best of the best. But how many people can the best of the best therapists take at a time? So maybe AI can duplicate.
I agree.
That's what I wanted to say.
Well, and AI is going to do phenomenal at skills coaching. It'll absolutely be amazing.
Is that like CBT or something, or what are we?
Potentially.
Skills coaching,
It would be an insult to CBT to call it skills coaching, but sure.
Yeah.
Yes, let's go with that.
Jay, to get you up to speed, I put a couple links in the chat here to share with everybody to get us kickstarted before everybody starts asking questions. New York Times, my favorite newspaper, of course, posted a article on a chatbot coming across as a therapist. People didn't know it. I guess they were getting some good service. And then afterwards, like, oh, I can't believe it's not butter.
Well, you can talk to a chatbot or the bartender, or
Yeah.
the chatbot's probably more well trained at therapeutic interaction than a bartender might be. But a bartender with some experience is probably pretty good. So, yeah. I suggest that people that need to see somebody actually see somebody. There's something to personal relationship that the amorphous internet connection may not ever provide. But if you need something and this is the quick and easy thing and it does some benefit, who's to grumble too much about that? And it proves itself out reasonably well when you kick the tires, it looks like a tire, it doesn't deform badly. So that they didn't get a bunch of people running out to commit suicide. They didn't insult anybody badly. However, I have heard of chatbots that have turned badly. So I don't think that unsupervised chatbots necessarily should be turned loose. There should be some oversight. There are chatbots that do end up calling people things and suggesting that they do things that aren't really in their best interest.
Yeah.
Joshua, did your account get hacked? I see a couple posts in here.
That's my wife.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm 90% sure that's my wife.
And then the other link that I had in there was Justin Bieber at the ripe old age of 31 is having some mental health issues, specifically anger issues.
Well,
that makes me mad.
There's different kinds of anger, if it's explosive anger that's really not rationally explained, it could be pseudobulbar affect with discharges in the temporal lobe, which are quite often not diagnosed, but they're really quite florid and unexpected, unexplainable, not rational emotional outburst. Now, it could be rage, but it could be a fit of laughter or a fit of crying. The term fit isn't fit for epilepsy anymore, but it's very descriptive. And a fit of anger, a rage attack of some sort, can be triggered by temporal lobe discharges, which are more common than one might think. The 70% of the autism spectrum has epileptiform content. In one study with over 1,000 people in it that did 24-hour study, full EEG for 24 hours, including sleep, they found 85%. So, yeah, exactly. And that was a huge study, and it was well done. And it's not like, well, that was 85 was such an outlier. I mean, a lot of them running in the 65-70% range. So, that's autism. ADD, ADHD, well, 35-40%. And psychiatric presentations, about a third of all psychosis ends up being underlying epileptiform content, not just being psychotic. So if you don't look at the EEG, you will never see it. And guess what profession doesn't look at the EEG? Psychiatry. The organ they treat is something they don't examine. Now there's some that do. You can't disparage the entire lot. Just 99.9% of them that don't look at EEG. So and it's a difficult skill to gain, but it's the right one to learn. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't be on the learning curve, for God's sakes.
Why aren't they teaching it to them, Jay? What's the problem?
Well, In fact, it takes time for institutions that are training people to change what they're training, first of all. But let's assume it was being taught today at a high level, and they came out of school with all the knowledge of neuroscience that you could cram in, all there, and they had every chat GPT thing that could assist them, and they just hit the market. What the hell can you do as a green behind the gills psychiatrist? Well, you could get a job for like Kaiser, but there you're limited to a very regimented, what you can do. You're not really free to do what you want to do. If you start to order a whole bunch of EEGs that aren't really ordered by the neurology department, you get in trouble as a psychiatrist. Go figure. Mm-hmm. If you're a psychiatrist and you want to become an electroencephalographer, the credential requires you, and you've got the same credential on damn wall, neurology and psychiatry board, you've passed. So did they. But if you want to be an electroencephalographer, they make you go back and take a neurology residency to knock all the psychiatry out of your head. So EEG is good for epilepsy and encephalopathies, and not anything to do with anything psychiatric. That's what neurology tries to keep the lid on things. And it doesn't work. The lid is off. Biological psychiatry is the largest growing piece of the field of psychiatry. Biological psychiatry is a growing segment of the APA. The APA itself is shrinking dramatically, and very, very dramatic differences from a decade ago to now, how many people attend their meetings. And it's way, way down. But then when the DSM says the diagnosis is not really relevant, what the hell are you going to the meetings for? Their field has a challenge. Figure out a different way to do it that's actually valid. And NIH threw that challenge down. Give us research domain criteria studies. Don't talk about a diagnosis. Show us data. Now, some biological measurement, a lab test. The cardiologist who sends everybody who complains of chest pain to go get an angioplasty is practicing like a psychiatrist. The symptom gets that outcome. Well, the symptom should get the test that says, oh, you've got indigestion. Go get a Tums. And your EKG, which is a lab test, tells me you need to actually have a heart thing. So, the cardiologist doesn't diagnose based on the story. The story tells them what test to do to treat. Psychiatry needs to get into the modern era of actually having some testing that makes their treatment predictions valid. And the APA said the whole DSM isn't valid just before they published it. A couple weeks before it was released to the public, Tom Ensel published the little note that says, "Oh, by the way, it's like it's highly replicable, highly reliable. You get the same diagnosis if you go through the same process. You get the same diagnosis again and again and again. Highly reliable, but no predictive validity." And the predictive validity is what you really need clinically. Well, other than the administrative billing code, the DSM is good for getting you a billing code.
Right.
I was going to say, Jay, I have a friend who's going through the psychiatry nursing program at UPenn, which is an Ivy League school. And she has sent me, or told me often, she thinks there is a reticence, a reluctance to admit or examine biological causes of mental health states. She thinks that there are political reasons. She's getting a strong vibe, and just from her anecdotes, and this is controversial, so we don't need to get into this, but too much. But she thinks there are people who they don't really want to know, in particular, that different brains may produce different mental states. The next thing I was just going to say is, after throwing that bomb, was I just read it last night about it. There's a new book on intuition from a university researcher, and he said that there is data showing that intuition, which is what the psychiatrists kind of maybe are solely relying on half the time, there is value in it. They showed there's value in physical therapy. They showed there's value in healing. There's value in cardiology. That's right, and preoperative surgical. But I am with Jay. This is like psychiatry is, I guess, maybe the one medical profession that there's no tests, you know. There's no blood tests for depression that's in circulation. And so he doesn't have a way of testing his assumptions or their intuitions. And so, yeah, I would love, and I think they're coming around slowly. I think it's slow, but it's happening.
Well, when they declared the DSM invalid and that research domain criteria was required to get funding, you imagine the institutional response. You own a university psychology lab, and the only thing you've studied for the last 20 years is schizophrenia. Okay. Well, you're all geared up with paper and pencil testing and whatever for schizophrenia, but you're not necessarily hooked up for EEG or voice testing or eye tracking, or there's no biological basis for any of the testing that's being done in the department. So your entire department funding has just been shot down, and you're not equipped for the new funding mechanism. So the institutions push back, and the DSM, before it came out, about a year before it came out, there was a big publication push that they were going to come out with all these biomarkers and genotypes and phenotypes, and it was going to be a whole new system. But that never happened. That's what they want, but they couldn't provide it, and it's still out there to be put together and provided. That's what they're asking for, research domain criteria papers. And Martijn Arns and I provided one almost immediately. They wanted it, and immediately. Beta spindles, what the hell do they correspond with independent of the DSM? Oh, insomnia. A surprise. A beta spindle associated with orexin as a wakefulness drive. And so there's a biological marker for some kinds of insomnia, not all. Some insomnia can be OCD driven rumination as opposed to arousal, CZ beta. But CZ beta itself is insomnia. Not all insomnia, but that kind of insomnia.
We have a quick question. Yeah, Radar. Radar says, I heard that the cingulate in particular are connected to the HPA axis and vagus nerve. That's reminding me of when Jay on the podcast has said that frontal midline theta is the fear switch. So I don't know if that's going to come up. I know it controls heart rate as well. Jay, or whoever, go ahead.
In fact, the frontal lobe through the vagal nerve ends up operating a lot of the body. So we've got direct connections. Martijn Arns actually showed that the spot that they're shooting the TMS magnet at, if they get the right spot, the heart decelerates. And they can use the amount of deceleration to titrate the strength of the pulse that they're sending. One of the problems in TMS is people passing out in the chair, because if you stimulate too strong, you get bradycardia. So you slow the heart. The heart rate has slowed down to the point where the person just passes out from not having sufficient cardiac function. So you can avoid that by actually looking at the EKG, using the EKG to tell you whether you got the right spot or not, and then titrating the strength of the TMS pulse. The science of how to do TMS has transcended you have depression, so we shoot it here. They're actually looking at EEG now, and they're trying to time the pulse. Well, I want the pulse to happen on the positive half wave of this, not the negative half wave. So we want to hit it when it's off, not when it's on. They're trying a lot of really fancy stuff now and getting a lot of progress because of it.
That's awesome. Jay, I think a natural follow-up question.
One thing about the reticence issue is, You don't want to be able to identify objectively psychiatric conditions if you're afraid of paying parity.
Explain that one.
If you're an insurance company, parity means you have to spend the same amount on this as you would if it was a hip replacement or a bad knee or a broken back or, whatever. I mean, this is another kind of an injury, and you gotta treat it. Parity means you have to pay. Now, in Washington State, the parents sued the insurance company to get parity for autism. Great, you get you get up to $500,000 spent in a year to treat. Well, that's parity. The insurance companies fought back, and they went to the state legislature and they said, okay, if we have to pay, then they have to get a formal diagnosis at a center of excellence, not just some general practitioner or a friendly doctor on the corner saying, oh yeah, you look autistic. You actually have to have a formal diagnosis in a center of excellence. So they fought back a little bit, but it meant that they had to pay. And that changed dramatically the level of practice that you could afford to provide in Washington State, because suddenly the insurance companies were having to pay for something. The thing is, what is there for autism? Is there a medication for it? I'm sorry, there isn't. If you have epileptiform content, there may be some meds that will help, but there is no medication for autism itself. You can take a stimulant for better attentional skill sets for some of them. It will help, but there's no medication for autism. Who do you go to for treatment? So the insurance companies were mandated to have to pay for therapies, and the therapies weren't giving them outcomes. And Greg Charbonneau, one of my old clients, back when I was still writing reports, we would meet weekly, and he basically asked for the insurance company to pay for the EEG, QEEG, and they denied service on it for an autistic kid. And he went back, and asked again, and it was the next year, and the case manager basically had just spent like $500,000 on this kid with nothing to show for it. And she said, well, it's not that expensive a test, go ahead. And, out of frustration with the system, this pitiful little charge compared to what they just wasted for the last year. So they did the EEG, and the EEG showed epileptiform content, and they medicated for the epileptiform content, and the kid's normalization was sufficient to get him off of the spectrum. He was no longer diagnosable as autistic. So, now that case manager says, anytime you need case authorizations for an autistic, you just give me a buzz, because you give me a result. I get an outcome return on investment, basically. And you can't cure autism because you can't catch autism. So it's the wrong model. But basically, it's as though you just cured that client. The client doesn't have a basis for any further demand for further services for autism. That problem is gone. If they break their leg, you got them as a client again as an insurer. But their brain has been put back together well enough so that they don't end up needing that. So,
Jay, I have in front of me a University of Cleveland review of 30 studies of neurofeedback. They found a small to medium effect in ADHD, but it said a, quote, large superior effect in addressing autism spectrum disorder. And I read that to an MD friend. He said, that's amazing. I said, oh, you think that's a good result for a treatment? He goes, there are no treatments for autism. Because I think lamotrigine is in clinical trials, so there's stuff that they're trying. But
if you give a drug to all the autism, there's let's say there's 70% of them, but not all of. And there they are right in front of you. You give them all lamotrigine, which might not be the med for their particular kind of discharge. It might be Keppra or clobazam, or I mean, the ethosuximide. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of drugs with different kinds of method of action, and you know, so you're going to take a drug that can treat effectively 20%, 30% of the overall population. How the hell are you going to show that's of any good at all? You know, it's good for the ones it's good for. You need the biomarker to tell you which ones to give it to.
It does sound still pretty typical for pharmacology, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much in line with what they do.
I know. And you know, when we found the clozaril, clozapine or clozaril is an antipsychotic. It's a fairly new, you know, but fairly new is still not all that new. In our lab, the tests for it were happening, and the state hospital that sent us the data, clozapine or clozaril was listed, and we saw epileptiform content again and again and again and again, and we reported it to the FDA. Now, you expect 5% in general, and no more than 20% or so of a clinical people being sent from a hospital psychiatric thing to have epileptiform. This was again and again and again. So we said to the FDA, this is outside of the reported 5% that's in the PDR that says the clozapine's a new drug, and this is 3 to 5% is like the background population, so it's not known to cause epilepsy. Or to trigger or facilitate epilepsy. And we were seeing it so consistently. So the FDA told them, well, remember the few months worth of data you gave us? Well, we want a year's worth of data. And when the percentages went up, they said, well, give us another year, and then another year. At 3 years, it stabilized at 30%. A third of the people that took that medication ended up with epileptiform content in their EEG. The response? People would be prescribed clozapine and Depakote. Well, because a third of them needed it, you give everybody Depakote, which is difficult on the liver. And I mean, it's
sedating.
The practice of medicine is still practicing. They still haven't gotten it figured out yet. I'll say that.
That's a good one. Talabo asks, what does it mean to reverse autism? Is it the same or different than a cure? Talabo, I think it means the person might be a little overconfident, but I'll let others, they might be selling something, in other words, but go on.
So the claim to cure autism is preposterous because, again, it's not, there's no biocidal agent that's going to kill it off. It's not something you can catch, so it's not something you can cure in that model. But the behaviors that you use to diagnose autism are specific kinds of behaviors. Social perception, the ability to look people in the eye, the ability to judge the intent of a little moral story. There's all sorts of little tests that they can do to kind of see whether somebody's got affective skill sets, and obviously, lexical processing for language and so forth. So if you can't speak and you can't judge social stuff, and your behavior is not well controlled, and you may have a whole bunch of different known genetic anomalies, but you're still lumped in the autism spectrum. It's known that it's not one thing. It's a bunch of things. And it's not something that one thing can fix because it's a bunch of things. One thing might help with something, but it's not going to fix everything. Neurofeedback can target specific pieces of it, but you need to be in a therapeutic milieu to take care of the let's say we turned on your social perceptual area. Suddenly, boom, suddenly you can see everything emotional around you. Well, for God's sakes, you're no good at perceiving that. You haven't perceived it ever, so you're going to misperceive. We need to put you in a social setting that's going to help you with your perceptual skill set in a therapeutic environment. Now that we've opened up your perceptual eyes, what are you seeing? How do you respond to that? And all that can be dealt with in a therapeutic environment. But we can open that up. And that ends up making the therapy work. If you don't open up the affect perception, you can talk about affect stuff all you want with the person. It's like talking about the sunset to a blind man. Yeah. Oh, it's brilliantly orange and so gorgeous tonight. Uh-huh. Yeah, I'm sure it is, you know. You know, but if you can't perceive it, you can't perceive it. And once you open up the perceptual pathways that can actually get that, then you need to learn by populating that network with experience. And I've seen a lot of people miss their critical period of experience and have it opened up later in life, having had it shut because of complex childhood trauma. And the right temporoparietal junction is just not working at all because of early life trauma. And you can see it in the EEG, and we can get that area woken back up. But again, the first thing they're going to do is misperceive, like a kid with a cochlear implant. I love you, little Johnny. You know, everybody's happy. Oh, little Johnny can hear mama, you know. But little Johnny, why don't you turn that damn thing off because of all the freaking noise? It's not noise. It's stochastic resonance, Johnny. Well, what the frick is stochastic resonance? It's all the high frequency stuff that makes the richness of your auditory environment. Ask a musician what stochastic resonance might mean, and you might get somebody who actually talks about the frequency responses and so forth. But you know, it's important that if you lose your high frequency response, you become less and less and less able to hear what people are saying. And that's an important thing to lose, you know. My audiogram goes kerplunk, you know. I have hearing aids, and my audiologist did the testing. I knew I needed hearing aids because what was my favorite saying? You know, what? You know, somebody was what? You know, so. She came in after the testing was done from the other room with the graphs and says, "You know, you're deaf." And I said, "What?" So they gave me hearing aids, and now I can hear the door alarm on the refrigerator that Renita would yell from the other side of the house. The refrigerator door is open, and I could stand next to it and cup my ears, and I couldn't hear a damn thing. Not one hint that there was something going on. And within maybe 5 feet of the microwave, I might hear the alarm there. It's louder, but when I'm a little bit further away, unless my hearing aids are in, you know, I can hear that from the other part of the house now. So,
Jay, I had a question. So if Josh wants to speak to that, he can.
Go, Josh.
I have a real quick thought. I want to give like a technical answer to Labo's question. As a therapist who does diagnosis, some people may have noticed, but the new revised DSM-5 it's a descriptive adaptation. We've talked about this, but it relies on the historical presentation of these symptoms, which means that if you stop having them, you don't not meet criteria. You don't stop meeting criteria. So you've presented these symptoms historically, that makes you meet criteria. So you don't stop meeting criteria because you normalize. And so you will never not meet criteria for autism if you've been diagnosed. Normalizing doesn't not make you not meet criteria. And that is very evident if you read the criteria. So from a technical standpoint, there's nothing that gets you out from under that because of how they've worded it in the newest edition. It is what it is.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Jay,
even though the current behavior may not qualify you.
Yes, absolutely.
The fact that you expressed it at some point.
Yeah. Technically, you can't get out of it. Yeah.
So you were mentioning, since it came up, the temporoparietal junction in social perception, I guess we would say. I was listening to Andrew Hill's podcast the other day, and he mentioned the right TPJ. And in his words, he said it often runs hot and it often doesn't want to calm down. And I think I have observed that in several people at this point so for instance, excess alpha, they have a lot of trouble reducing it there. It's producing a lot of side effects for them. And I
But
didn't know if you had insight into that.
excess alpha wouldn't be hot. It might be
Yeah.
hot
Yeah,
read in a map.
I hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's that hot spot in the alpha map.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
alpha is
It's not fast.
hypoperfusion, so it's a
Mhm.
resting state below
Okay.
11 hertz.
Yeah.
If your alpha is real fast, it's not
Yeah.
really at rest. It's a neutral positive perfusion. But the it's hot or cold. The thing
Hear
is,
you.
let's say this spot in the brain does something, XYZ, whatever it
Yes.
might be. Well, if it's not working, that behavior doesn't work. Whether this is
Hmm.
not working because of theta or alpha or beta, it's not working.
Hmm.
So the behavior is going to look exactly the same. You know,
Understood.
how many
Yeah.
OCDs are there in the DSM? Oh, how many do
Yeah.
we see? 3. And we can
Yeah.
predict medication. You know, I mean, if all you're
Hmm.
doing is academically coming up with more subgroups, then it's just academic masturbation. Forget it. There's
Yeah.
nothing productive. You're never going to come up with another something
Yeah.
out of it. This is just massaging stuff that shouldn't be massaged.
Yeah.
And and if you actually have subcategories that predict treatment effectively, that's predictive validity. And that's what you need.
Mhm.
So you have OCD behavior, anterior cingulate's probably the spot, but it doesn't tell you what's not working there. It tells you where to look.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if you have OCD, we know where to look, but we might find slow, which is not
Mhm.
going to respond badly to, but it won't respond positively to an SSRI. You could have alpha below 10, which will respond 85% of the time positively to SSRI.
Mhm.
Or you could have beta, which will respond badly to the SSRI.
Mhm.
So, you know, and if you have the beta, there's specific medications that can reduce beta. There's different classes of that some more hazardous than others, but that you can treat that with medications as
Mhm.
well. So, you know, the DSM showing only one category, I'm actually surprised that they haven't found more subsets, because that's what they do. You know,
Yeah.
oh, there's a fine way to chop this one up smaller. And they do it. The little sub-diagnostic categories, but um, there's a factor analytics study on the DSM, and they found that there's a very limited number of features that end up predicting most of what you see in the DSM. So that it's a matter of time before AI and neuroscience and psychiatry and insurance companies and everybody get together and kind of throw out the old way of doing things.
Mhm.
That happens over time, and it's painful, and we're going through some of that.
Everybody, go to your kitchen cupboard and take out your aluminum foil. Please take out a 2 square sheet, rip it off, and fold it and put it on your head for this question. Has autism always been around, or are we just noticing it? Like, speculate on when did it start popping up, and what's happening with it? Why is it happening? Was it in the
Mhm.
50s? We just didn't know it, or what happened? Speculate.
It appears that the incidence of it may be on the rise, but that's also the case with a lot of other things as well.
Mm.
So the autoimmune problems are way up, but we've got microplastics in the rain, and we've got microplastics in deep burrowed stuff underground now. You can't find any place that doesn't have this stuff anymore. So
200 feet.
Mhm.
um, it, toxic substances that have been released historically are still hanging around. Richmond, California, about 20 years ago, they remediated the DDT where it was made was right there, and the little stream and the harbor and where they shipped it out from, all that had DDT in the sediment and everything. So they dredged and hauled off and fixed everything 20 years ago. Well, they just did testing. that remediation didn't remediate. It's all back there. So that if you go around and you look near where you are and you look carefully, that there's probably lots of toxic sites close by. A lot of them with homes built on them. Benicia, California, gorgeous little tiny town. Rolling hills were bulldozed flat. Used to have a dump, a municipal dump, literally a dump, the old kind where you just throw shit in a ravine, not like a manicured with a liner and all of that. They just bulldozed all this stuff flat, and their homes all over on top of that now. Well,
Wow.
it's not Love Canal, but man, how wise is it to do that kind of stuff? Hercules, California, they built all sorts of stuff on top of what used to be where they made it's the dynamite city. It's where they made TNT and other explosives during World War II. It's why Point Pinole doesn't have any development on it. It's an open park because everything under the ground is too toxic to have a developer come and build on it because they'd have to remediate something.
Is it our diet or exposure to petroleum, or it's everything?
Everything. If there's any immune thing that has anything to do with it, our immune systems are being triggered. They're finding inhaled smoke now is so much more known. The hazards are so much more known now. Firemen, they have forever chemicals in their fire suits and everything. They're risking their life and limb and health long term by being exposed to forever chemicals in their Nomex. So that if you had TCE anywhere in your area, you have a high likelihood of having a Parkinson's presentation. There are Parkinson's clusters in the United States where if you live in this area, you have a high likelihood. If you don't live in this area, you have a much lower likelihood of having a Parkinsonism diagnosis. So
people who garden and golf have it's like a 2x higher risk factor for Parkinson's because of the fertilizers. Yeah. But Pete, I was going to say, Jay is the environmental expert, and all of that I'm sure is at play.
I'm not touching Jay on any of it.
I said it last time. I'm going to be this. Nobody's probably going to want to hear this. I'm going to say it again. So it's not just for you, Pete. Parental obesity is a 2 to 4x risk factor for infant autism. Okay. And you can look that up. The same is true for ADHD. And what has skyrocketed in the past 70 years. And the other thing, to even put a better point on, and you can Google this, everybody talks about, well, the anxiety's gone up since the phones. Well, you know what else, particularly teen anxiety? You know what, if you look at a chart, what went up, skyrocketed in the 2010s? Obesity, youth obesity drastically increased. And it has to do, I think, with frontal slowing. If you search, again, don't take my word for it, frontal slowing and obesity are correlated. And we know that is a key autism phenotype, at least as I understand from Jay's work. So while I think I had a nutrition client, he says it's never just one thing. I think that's true, but I'm not seeing effect sizes like what I'm seeing for obesity. And also neurodivergent people are more at risk for obesity and addiction, I need to add. So that's
the frontal marker is a reward deficiency marker. And it goes along with obesity, not because of the weight gain or your blood level of fats or anything such as that. This is craving, and that's what's there. Dirk de Ritter actually showed that infralow frequency neurofeedback training at the anterior cingulate can stop craving in eating disordered individuals. So a very nice study. Not only did they look at the infra-low frequency training, but they showed that the slow cortical potentials that were trained actually nested and controlled the faster EEG frequencies. So they may be training, sub 1 hertz, a long ways below 1 hertz, down 0.00, it's very, very super low frequency, but it's not really a wave. This isn't a 100-second long wave that's going on. This is a level that can go up and down, and it's on and off for the cortex. And there are diurnal rhythms that turn on and off the cortex. So you're more active and less active. The diurnal, the early morning cortisol rush during sunrise, and then a little bit of a burst in the afternoon, but then your cortisol level drops for sleep. So there's rhythms that happen that are very slow. Yuri Kropotov has a very nice publication on slow rhythmicities and some of their drivers. He was one of the ones who identified using inserted gold wire polarization changes, identifying the oxygenation cycle, a decasecond, 10-second long wave in the brain that had to do with oxygenation, and which corresponds nicely with the 6 breaths a minute sort of thing that people are talking to. Might be a healthy thing to match up with what your oxygenation cycle is with what you're actually doing with your respiration. But the slow content is an important thing. Neurofeedback can tap into it. There's competing groups, but really it's the same signal. They really should get past the personal stuff that keeps them from kind of merging thoughts. But that'll happen over time. Neurofeedback is full of moments in which there were different clusters that had to cross-pollinate before they figured things out. So,
Joshua, what's the update on the book? The book, I saw you had the
So I put my initial introduction to neurofeedback book out there and got really good feedback, and I deleted like 25% of the content and added another 50 pages to it and put it back out there. And I'm probably just going to keep editing it every year because it's been fun and it's been an educational process. But yeah, it's just neurofeedback for all, a beginner's introduction on Amazon. I tried to put it as cheap as I could sell it, but Amazon literally would not let me put it below $21. So I apologize. I don't know what that's about. I was entertained by, I'm just going to sell it for as cheap as it'll let me. And it wasn't as cheap as I wanted.
So, your book has gone through an edit. Through feedback. Feedback allowing self-regulation in some fashion. How does that work?
I'm gonna keep doing it too.
But feedback to the author ends up with a next edition and an upgrade with people's thoughts. And I've seen some of the probable online course sort of presentation materials that he's working on. I think it's going to blow a lot of people out of the water when they start to actually see some of this stuff done. It's impressive presentation.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I would love to hear the audible version of that, Joshua, with corresponding slides. Yeah.
You are not the first person today who asked for that, by the way.
Oh, wow.
I don't know how to do all that.
Yeah.
That's a good sign.
I wonder what pages they're looking for. What do you think the hot chapters are?
I know that James, I forget his last name, but he's asking me, he runs a neurofeedback company. He's asking me for the Kindle version. And I tried so hard to get it converted to Kindle, but the format just exploded when I uploaded to Kindle. So there's something I need to do about the format. And I need to do a little bit of web searching to figure out how to get it converted to a format that will be accepted and integrated properly into Kindle. And then I'll give James what he wants. I know his last initial C. I always forget his last name. Do you know his name? Anybody know his name?
James.
No.
Who's
JJ?
Gaddis?
Oh,
that's Jay.
He runs a neurofeedback program. It's going to bug me because I do like him.
Gee, the name of somebody who runs a neurofeedback program.
James Kroll. James Kroll. Yeah.
Oh,
James
yeah,
Kroll.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
he co-runs one of the groups that meets with me to
Great.
go over raw EEG waveforms.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he
Josh,
gave me a lot
well,
of feedback on the book, and I implemented the changes. Yep.
let's be smart and put the link.
I'm really
to your
happy to
book
see
here.
I'm happy to see the groups do that because it gets the price down to a reasonable amount.
Yes.
I think there's like 16 sessions that are going to happen, and it's like $150. So $10 a pop for hour-long EEG reviews. Now, because of the size of the group, it isn't always your EEG from you or your group, but yeah, it's an interesting case from somebody's practice, and you're going to learn something about it. So it's people keep signing back up for it. New people keep coming in. Some people drop off. That there's a learning curve, and after you've seen enough raw waveform, some people feel comfortable enough to step away and do other things. But there's always room for more people within these small groups.
Mm-hmm.
Sure enough, neurofeedback for all. Let's give it a like.
It's amazing.
That's
I
nice.
think that's the best way to learn. I don't know how anyone would do it without doing a mentoring group, to be blunt. I don't advise it. So I put it in our, I think, admin chat. You'll have to put it in because I can't add links.
Yeah, here.
Links.
Rustam Yamesh over in Australia suggested that they do a virtual me because I'm a quantity that's going to disappear at some point, and at that point he wants to have a virtual version of me, and he asked an AI what they would have to do for that, and they had, well, you got to gather all of the writings and all of the talks and all of this, and I'm thinking, damn, if they gather all of the talks, if they had all of the EEGs from all the groups that I've done, the problem is that the groups don't necessarily de-identify the patients, and within a group that's still reasonably, it's not my preference, but it's still reasonably acceptable within a consulting population to have a patient's name still viewed. But those things can't just be tossed out for other folks to use. So there's a lot of gems out there sprinkled amongst all of the various talks, but I'm afraid a lot of that is not retrievable. So
Yep. Well, we'll be studying it for decades just to squeeze out every last ounce of wisdom.
I had somebody who sent one in and wanted a comparison. So I went into the old files folder, and they've been consulting with me for quite a few years. And I scrolled and scrolled and scrolled through the alphabet of names. I said, "Geez, Louise!" It was one at a time. I don't, how do I get this? Yeah, and that's how you end up with the 500,000 too, one at a time. Just a whole bunch of them one at a time. And,
well, I remember when I first worked with you, we'd go through one, in an hour, and you take your time. And I didn't know that you could knock out 4 in an hour. And it wasn't until you kind of carried me to the point where I was able to follow along quick enough, and I understood the basics, and I was able to do these editing of myself, and I wasn't confused by absolutely everything all the time. And then I got into a group, and then you slowly sped the group up, and it was like, now we're doing 2, maybe now we're doing 3, and it was like, oh, Jay can really knock out 4 in an hour, and as long as we keep the pace and understanding, you'll do it. And I just didn't know you did that until
the thing is, eventually I just have to say, there's one of those.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, one of those. And the first time it was, well, blah 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 blah. 10 minutes later, the one of those was described. So after that, it's one of those. So it saves time to have the shorthand of experience to be able to say, oh, look, what are those? And there's ones of those all over the place. And once you start to recognize them, as a unique entity within the EEG, and you know what they mean, then you can end up predicting, oh, that finding in this location, I bet they have a reward deficiency problem. Here's the list of those symptoms. Oh yeah, it lines up with what they're complaining about. We know where we're going to be training. So it's astounding to see the biological psychiatry starting to happen in front of you. When I've seen the resistance to it, my traditional EEG background and just classic diagnostic of epilepsy and encephalopathy, and enough neuroscience to understand the psychiatric presentations, and having been trained by those that hadn't dismissed the psychiatric presentations. I mean, Gibbs and Gibbs. Recently, I posted online the first transmitted EEG, the proof evidence of the calibrations transmitted and received being equivalent, and a section of EEG that was printed on a paper that the head stamp on the paper, Plexicraft used to print for a lab that you'd have your lab on the top. It was for Gibbs Lab on Michigan Avenue. Fred and Erna Gibbs. It was transmitted by Trudy and Eric, their kid and his wife, and Bill Rowe received it in their primary office in Chicago. So I have that paper, and I had photographs of it, and I put it online along with some pictures of a lot of early stuff in the field, odd memorabilia, which included.
Oh.
Give me a second here to reach.
Oh, we're getting a tour.
Yeah.
Joshua, how did you? Jay's back.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
In the field I was in, telephonic transmission of the EEG, you would take EEG and run it through telephone line.
There it is.
And here's the watch that was given for a retirement. The gold watch for retirement with the telephones with EEG streaming out of a head and in across to another phone. But I also posted pictures of all of the different kinds of transmitters, and the engineer who built them interacted with me about all that history. The actual carrier frequency numbers are embedded in his head. He can't get those numbers out of his head. On a telephone line, if you're going to transmit EEG, which is an amplitude modulated signal that goes up and down across time, and all you got to do is track the up and down because time's time. And so you amplitude modulate a frequency. So you amplitude to frequency modulate. So you pick a center frequency and modulate it back and forth like the EEG goes up and down. Well, that back and forth has to be assigned to a center frequency, and there has to be enough center frequencies to carry enough channels of data. Back then, you could squeeze 10 into a voice grade phone line. And he remembered every single center frequency in the lab. The first receivers that we had were built custom. It's not something you go to. I guess Radio Shack doesn't even exist anymore. So you don't go out and buy a brainwave transmitter and receiver. You build them. You have to invent them. And the receivers had a phase lock loop that would center on the frequency, and then track the center frequency, and then frequency to amplitude transform it back to the EEG machine to print it out. So it went from amplitude to frequency, from frequency back to amplitude, and it was printed out. And that system, the receivers, you had to make sure that they were centered at the right center frequency so they would catch the EEG within that frequency band. So we would go around and stick in a digital frequency counter and tweak all of these. Now, what were we tweaking? Well, inside the little slot that the screwdriver fit in was a hose clamp, a freaking plumbing hose clamp on a coil that had a notch cut out of it, and you'd clamp the coil tighter or looser to get more or less induction. So it was an inductively tuned circuit, and all we were doing is playing with a plumbing clamp tightening up a coil. Now, Larry Woodard replaced that with solid state for phase lock loop stuff when he built the receivers. But we went from the analog device to a digital upgrade to those analog devices, but they were still analog amplification. So, anyway, it's the crazy history was all plunked down a long stream full of a bunch of pictures of old transmitters and receivers and discussions with Larry. So.
Let's knock out Radar's last question, and we'll boogie on.
Yeah.
What's the benefit of getting good at looking at the raw waveform, Jay?
Oh, apparently not very much. You get old and you retire, So, that if you can see it in the raw waveform, it's there. First of all, a lot of the analytics can give you images of stuff that may not even be real. Harmonics that are generated by the Fourier because it's not a sinusoidal waveform. And if you use a digital filter that's not Fourier, you don't end up seeing that frequency because it was not there. It was manufactured by the analysis. So if you know the raw EEG well enough, you can see in the raw EEG enough to give essentially a personality review of who the person is, how do they present in real life. And if you ask a neurologist or a psychiatrist if that can be done, they will say no. And for them, that's the right answer. They couldn't, But if you know EEG well enough and you know neuroanatomy and neurophysiology and brain function well enough, you can look at it and say, the EEG tells me that this spot, which does this thing, is too active or not active enough. And the pattern I see and the coherences and so forth that I can see tell me that you present like this. And for years, I've presented lectures where I have no clue who the patient is, and they give me raw data I've never seen before. I analyze it live in front of the crowd with no known safety net, and this is the raw EEG. This is the spectral maps of it. Yeah, it's Karnak. This person is like this, and when you do that time after time after time, and you're mostly right, the people in the audience have to think, well, maybe it's actually possible. The last day of those workshops, we give to them, I've just generated the symptoms from seeing the EEG. And we give them the EEG and the list of symptoms, and they have to pinpoint where the symptom is in the EEG. This symptom is this finding, this symptom is that finding, because they just saw me reverse engineer it, and they know it's possible. It's not normally how it's done. Most of the time you read EEGs with some knowledge of the patient, so you have some perceptual bias. Oh no. I'm going to be looking over here when it's happening over here because my perceptual bias tells me to look over here. And I prefer reading EEGs knowing the age, so I can have a perceptual bias for kind of what the tuning should be, what networks should be mature already or not, and what the background frequency range of normal should be for that age range and so forth. So I want to know the age. And after that, I basically just tell you what the person's like.
I was actually going to quit brain mapping, by the way, until I got Jay as a mentor, because I was just barely bright enough to realize I had huge blind spots, and that these maps that I was looking at could be a lot of things. And I was right more than I thought I was, and that the list of things that those maps could have meant that were not what they looked like was longer than I could fit on a single page. Like, it was a huge list of things that could be fooled by. And I had that intuition, like, this is not accurate enough. There's too many things that these could be. And I was piecing together that there was a lot of different ways that these could be. And I got into this field because I wanted to help people that other systems had failed. And I was not interested in doing a brain map that had a margin of error for like 25% of the people or 50% of the people who took the brain map. So like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. Otherwise, we didn't get into it to have a high margin of error. We just didn't get into this to do that. And I was sensing this high margin of error in it, and I wasn't feeling good about it.
Mapping detached from the EEG basically is missing step one.
Yes.
If you take step two before you take step one, you will fall on your face and you're going to make a mistake. Doing step one first allows you to see transients and state changes that are going to be averaged across time, and you lose the observance of a transient. Transients average out; they don't average up. And the QEEG is the average of your background activity. And there's a lot of good information in that, but the maps themselves will miss transient events.
Yeah.
You get one epileptiform discharge in a 10-minute EEG, average the whole thing with one discharge in it, you won't see that discharge. But if you see it and you understand what it is and where it's going on and everything, you know what it is.
In the next edition of my book, Jay, I put that exact case where it was averaged out. And it was in there. It was in the raw data. And it was also corroborated with cognitive testing that where they had the instabilities, where they had the bilateral sharp subtransients, were corroborated with the cognitive testing saying these neuro regions are associated with these deficits that are clinically significant, and they averaged out in the maps.
Yeah.
And so that's in the next edition.
What book is it?
The databases do their best to try to get around that problem by burst metrics and various things like that. But the raw waveform is how you see transients. All the quantitative processing sort of misses those. And Makoto looked at some data that I had gone through and identified pieces of the EEG that showed a transient that corresponded with ischemia. So they were trying to come up with a metric that would track ischemia accurately. And their first pass, they got about 25-30% match with me. And so I spent some time telling them in great detail what it was I was seeing, the minutia of it, not just the piece, but what in there am I seeing, and the various frequencies that are contained in it and so forth. And after that, they got a 75% hit. And they said, well, it's better, but we're not there yet. And I said, well, I'm not wrong a quarter of the time. Maybe you got it exactly right, and I just over the top calling too many of them.
Joshua, what was the name of that book, Joshua? Because Radar wants to know how he can learn more about neurofeedback.
We probably need to go to the link because I don't know if it's actually caught on the algorithm, but it's Neurofeedback for All, a beginner's introduction. The old edition hasn't come down yet, even though I told it to come down. It hasn't come down.
Go to Amazon, punch in Joshua Moore. You'll see it right there. All the beautiful 5-star
just look for the second edition. The first edition hasn't come down yet. Just a warning. You want the second edition. It's a lot better. So
okay, second edition. And then in October, Jay, if you are just strolling about in Western California, Central Western California.
I get older every October. It's my birthday, and I can't do anything as far as traveling for parties or meetings or anything. So people pop in here, and we have a 3-day EEG meeting and birthday party. And so from the 8th to the 11th, we're having the Sassoon Summit here in town to celebrate EEG. We've got students coming from Australia presenting Z-score related training, which everybody thinks, Jay's going to never let anybody see anything like that. Well, the science is science. If you're doing science, it's whatever people need to see. So he was invited. We're, paying him to come over from Australia and show. We've got Savannah coming over from Macedonia. Lisa Vortoloro from Italy. We've got international folks. Santiago's gonna come over for it.
Show me the money.
Yeah, Lee Steinberg is going to be there as well, and you know your life has been exciting if they pick Tom Cruise to play you in a movie, you know. So and he's got a lot to say. I mean, he's represented elite athletes for many, many, many years. It's made him a small fortune, and his, you know, clients and eventually friends end up with brain injuries. So he's actually got a yearly meeting that he does for TBI that brings in athletes and doctors, and they talk about TBI. And as a philanthropist, he's donated over $1 billion with a B dollars for philanthropy. So why wouldn't we invite him? You know, the TBI is a topic that we've got. We've got a one talk from a group on brain injury TBI rescue. We've got another talk from double doctor Deborah McClendon. She just got her second doctorate. And it's on TBI. And she's done a presentation to Toyota, who are investing in community things related to head injury, and they're just moving to the California territory with this outreach. They just did it in Chicago and donated a bunch of money to a bunch of doctors who are looking for blood biomarkers for head injury. Because once you have a mild head injury, what marker do you look for? You know, there's probably, you know, biomarkers that can be drawn out from blood tests, EEG analysis, all sorts of different kinds of biomarkers that could be picked up for that. So it'll be good to have him in to kind of see what we're doing and to explain his impact on the field and his experience with respect to the neurofeedback world. So,
well, Talbot, Radar, everybody that showed up.
Tiff and Nick will be there.
Oh, Tiff and Nick.
Yeah. So it'll be a party, you know. My birthday party is always a party. I'll guarantee that. And if you're not having a good time, you should go do something else, you know. But you're welcome to come and have a good time, you know. And if I'm not having a good time, I'll leave my own party, you know. So I'm a devout hedonist. So absolutely will not tolerate staying somewhere I'm not having a good time.
Well, Joshua, Jay, Anthony, thank you for hanging out overtime. Radar, Talbot, everybody. Every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central. You got a question, ask it here. If not, then I'll ask the questions. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you all.
Catch you later.
See you in the morning, Jay.
It's true.